Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Opportunity. I'm your host, Gregory Elfrink, the head of marketing at Empire Flippers. And today I am bringing to you a very special guest, Nancy Harhut, the author of Behavioral Science and Marketing. I totally just butchered that name, the real name of the titles in the show notes, and we talk about it in the show. But Nancy is awesome. I had a really good conversation with her on here, and we talked about one of my favorite subjects in marketing, which is the psychology behind it, the actual neuroscience that triggers buying decisions. This is something that I think is so important that every entrepreneur and marketer, like if you don't know this stuff, you should take a few days over the coming next 2 weeks or so, buy Nancy's book, or just start learning this type of stuff. I mentioned another book in this podcast called The Believing Brain by Michael Shermer. And that's one of the books that got me really turned on to this stuff. And to me, this is the foundation, the ticking heart of marketing itself that most people will never do. And if you do it in your own business, just like the campaigns Nancy talks about in this episode, you're probably going to see some amazing positive returns. So with that said, enough compliment machine gun to Nancy. She was a really awesome guest. I am going to go, and I will see you on the other side. All right, Nancy, I am happy that you are here on the Opportunity. The first question we like to ask on the show is to give us a little intro about yourself, who you are, and where you are in the world right now.
All right. Well, my name is Nancy Harhut. I'm the co-founder and chief creative officer of HBT Marketing. And HBT stands for Human Behavior Triggers. And we deliberately chose the name because our marketing agency combines marketing best practices with behavioral science. And for those of your listeners who are unfamiliar with the term, behavioral science is really simply the study of how people behave. And what behavioral scientists have found is very often people don't make well-considered, well-thought-out decisions. What they do instead is they respond instinctively, reflexively, automatically with these hardwired innate behaviors. And so what we do is we try to trigger those hardwired behaviors to increase the likelihood that our clients get the engagement and the response they're looking for. So as a result, we ended up naming the agency HBT, Human Behavior Triggers, HBT Marketing. So we're based in Massachusetts, and that's where I am today.
I was just in Massachusetts. We were talking a little bit offline, but I just went to Inbound in Boston. That was my first time ever on the East Coast. It's funny, I've traveled around the world so many times now, but I still had never been to the East Coast until a few weeks ago. I liked it. It was cool.
Good. Well, it's a fabulous conference. And speaking as an ambassador to Massachusetts, it's a wonderful state.
You're obliged to say that, just in case anyone in Massachusetts is listening to this. Better speak highly of the state. Awesome. Well, I want to get into HBT and all this stuff. Like everything you just said there's a lot of interesting things from my background as a content marketer and copywriter, psychology nerd, basically, that I want to unpack. But before we do that, give us a little taste of how you got to this place. So is the HBT Marketing as an agency your first foray into the entrepreneurial world, or where did you come about to get to your current place?
So I started out in the agency world, and I worked for some of the well-known agencies in the holding companies. So I was at Hill Holliday, and I was at Mullen, and I was at Digitas. And as often happens in the advertising world, you start to work with big agencies, and then you start to work your way into the smaller agencies because you get a little bit older, and there are layoffs and mergers and acquisitions, right? And so then I worked at a smaller agency called Wild, and that was actually owned by a printing company. And after a while, they decided to pivot and just double down on printing and get out of the agency business. And so the president of the agency turned to me and said, people really liked what we were doing. There was a market, and what do you say we hang out our own shingle? And for the longest time, people had said, Nancy, when are you going to go off on your own? When are you going to start your own agency? And we said, I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and I'm good at what I do, but you have to know so many other things if you're going to hang out your own shingle. maybe I'll just leave things the way they are. But this kind of was the little nudge that shoved me out of the nest, basically. And my former president, I was the creative director there, he was the president, he and I joined forces and we created HBT Marketing. And honestly, that was 5.5, 6 years ago. I haven't looked back since. It's worked out so well. He was absolutely right. There is clearly a market for what we're doing. Of course, I knew that because there was a market when we were under the auspices of the other agency, but things have worked out really well. And I think what you do is you find out that you maybe know a little bit more than you thought you did. Maybe you picked it up by osmosis along the way, or you're just better prepared to do some of the things that you didn't think you were going to be prepared for. But it's worked out really well, and I'm happy about that.
That's awesome. I find like most entrepreneurs I talk to on this podcast, there seems to be like the inherent desire, but also like a trigger moment, like that is just like that pushes you out of the nest, like let's go, let's do it. And once you get past that initial bump is just of starting any new business seems the absolute worst part of the business until you get traction. But once you get going, it's just like an amazing experience talking to my friends about it. I want to get into HBT marketing as an agency before we get into the questions on behavioral science and neuromarketing. I find that fascinating too. But before I get into either of those, I'm just curious, what's it like working at one of these gigantic digital ad agencies? I grew up, like my initial love for marketing could stem from me watching like Mad Men, like reading a psychology book, all that stuff. I never had any formal experience. So what's that landscape like?
It was a lot of fun. I always enjoyed it and always learned something. Well, I guess very often I was in the direct and digital marketing of a large branding agency. The major exception was Digitas, which was really much more focused on one-to-one marketing and not really doing a lot of branding. But what was great about it is you were surrounded by smart people, and that's not only just at the agency as your colleagues, but also the clients that you were working with. So you were always working with smart people. I had the opportunity to work with some really big, interesting brands, as well as some kind of scrappy challenger brands or even some smaller startups. And it just gives you such a great perspective about how business is done and what it takes to convince people to behave the way you want them to. And when I say that, I'm talking about customers and prospects, but to get them to do what you want them to do. And I was able to do a fair amount of testing because it was always a test and learn environment. And that was really insightful because you would see what works and what doesn't. And sometimes you'd be absolutely certain that you had a winner and it wouldn't be a winner. And sometimes the dark horse would be the thing that actually end up working for you. So it was a good one. I really enjoyed it. Again, smart people, smart clients, and a lot of good learning.
That's awesome. It sounds like a cool environment. With your agency, HBT Marketing, what's your main kind of customers and businesses you're serving as far as your client base goes?
We have a range of them. We have quite a few in the financial services and insurance sector, not by design, probably more because of referrals, word of mouth. Have some success and then someone refers you and then someone else refers you. But we've also done some work in telecom and software as a service and high tech and education and not-for-profit and some consumer goods. So we've done a range of different industries and different verticals. It's really more about clients who are looking for that added advantage in terms of getting their customers and prospects to do what they want them to do. And that doesn't seem to be vertical specific. It has applications across a wide range of industries.
Yeah, I can totally see that, which actually segues into my next question perfectly, because I researched a little bit about you with the neuromarketing and behavioral science stuff that you're talking about. And just throwing it out there, one of my favorite copywriting books I ever read is a book called The Believing Brain by Michael Shermer. He's a Stanford psychologist and has nothing to do with copywriting, but all about how belief is formed. So for our audience out there, for those not familiar with the term neuromarketing and behavioral and decision science, how would you describe that and how would you apply that to marketing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the best way to describe it is to say that very often, particularly in marketing, but generally in life, we assume that people make well thought out, well considered decisions. As a marketer, when we put our information out there, we think that people are going to study it, they're going to pore over it, they're going to weigh the pros and cons, do the cost benefit analysis, and they're going to make well thought out, well considered decisions. And as consumers, just as people, we also think that we make good decisions. And if someone asks us, why did you do that? we usually have an answer and we believe the answer, but very often it's not the honest answer, which is not to say that we're being deceptive, we're not lying to ourselves or to other people. It's just that a lot of times there are factors at play that influence our decisions that we're not even aware of. And so we'll make a decision and then somebody will ask us, why did you do that? And we'll point to a really good reason. We'll point to some fact or some rational explanation as to why we did this. I bought the car because the gas mileage is really good. I chose this particular shirt because it looks good on me and it was on sale. The price was right. But it turns out that that's only part of the equation. And very often there are other things at play and we're not aware of them, but they do influence us. Marketers aren't aware for the most part of these things that influence people. And that's why the study of behavioral science is so important for marketers, because once we start to understand how people really make decisions, we can start to influence them. And that actually helps us as marketers, but it also helps our customers and our prospects, because we know that people aren't totally focused, they're not totally in the moment, they're responding automatically, and so we can help them make the decisions that are right for them, and as a result, that also helps us. So, for example, people are really, really busy, they think they have time to get to something, they'll do it later, and if we say to them, hey, look, there's a deadline coming up, or there's only so many of these left, or these sold out last time, we expect they're going to sell out this time, that's actually helpful information for someone to have, because if you don't tell them that and then they go to get something and they've missed the deadline or the quantities are gone or it's sold out again, they're like, why didn't you tell me? You were advertising this, you were telling me that I should get it, but you left out a really critical piece of information. So I think once we understand how people make decisions, it helps us as marketers create better marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you said there made me think of a few things. I'm curious of what you think of this. So I often describe the buyer journey as pretty segregated between emotion and logic, which I feel like that's what you're kind of getting at. It's interesting. Like I would have said deceive, but maybe the better word is us being naive to our own self, in that a lot of people are like, oh, those ads don't work on me, or I buy something based on logic purely. But when you dig into it, it seems like every purchase someone makes of some sort is an emotional decision. And once they make that decision, then it's backed up by logic. Like, yeah, of course, the price is right, the shirt me nice, like things like that. Is that, like, based on your research, resonating as true with what you've seen in your own work?
100% right. People absolutely make decisions for emotional reasons, and then they later justify those decisions to themselves, to other people, with the rational reasons. So what that means to marketers is we want both of those components in our marketing messages and in our campaigns. And that's true not only of just B2C, but also in B2B, also in business to business, even with boring products or technical products or really sophisticated products, or when marketing to really highly intelligent people, it doesn't make a difference. We still want to have that emotional component, because that is how people decide. They decide based on emotion. That's what drives the decision. And then they quickly justify based on the rational reasons.
I think it's so funny. I'm glad you brought up the fact that it works in B2B too, because I see a lot of B2B marketers in my space. Like when I was at Inbound in Boston, I just couldn't help it but notice all the booths with all this fancy technical jargon that absolutely nothing to me. Like everywhere, like, man, you guys spent a lot of money being here. Like I have no idea what you actually do based on this like tagline. And I think a lot of people, especially in the B2B space, forget that at the end of the day, like, yeah, you might be selling to an SDR or a marketing director, but those people are, well, people. They buy things similar to normal people buy their next e-commerce product that they're buying off of Amazon. I always think that's quite funny.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. People are people, whether they're at home or at the office. And, a lot of times we think, particularly in B2B, that people are only going to make a decision that's right for the company. And that's only partly true. I mean, obviously they have the company's best interest at heart, but they're people and they have their own best interest at heart also. They want to make sure that they're going to look good to their boss. They want to make sure that they're not going to get fired because they made the wrong decision. They want to make sure that whatever they're implementing is going to be easy enough so that they can get home to their family at a reasonable hour, and they're not going to sign on for 24-hour days for the next 3 months trying to get something installed. And then you raise another point with language. And everyone is selling a solution, but you end up scratching your head going, but what exactly is the solution? What is it? I mean, is it a piece of software? Is it a piece of hardware? Is it consulting services? Like, what is it that you're selling me, And the need for us as marketers to be clear and to communicate precisely what we're talking about is a huge need. A lot of times we over-rely on jargon and acronyms and technical speak, or we use a 75-cent word when a 25-cent word will do, and we think we're doing the right thing. We think that that makes us look smart and sophisticated and tuned into the target market, but the truth of the matter is people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand, and that's across the board. That's highly educated people and not as educated people. That's B2B, that's B2C. We just prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand, and as marketers, the way to deliver that is to use simpler language. And what behavioral scientists have found is people actually feel more confident in their ability to make a decision about things that they find easy to think about and easy to understand. In fact, behavioral scientists call the idea cognitive fluency, which is kind of a mouthful of a phrase, but it really just means we
Give it to their own jargon.
I know. They should call it easy to understand, But it's really important. But people prefer it and they're more apt to make a decision. And that's, of course, what we want as marketers.
I love that. I think not only can people benefit from stating the solution in an easier to understand language, but sometimes you should also state the problem. Like you mentioned, what is the solution? Like I feel like sometimes marketers, and I think you've probably had this experience, you way more experience than me, but I feel like a lot of times marketers forget that a lot of people don't even know that they have a problem that needs a solution, right? Like take a step back here, like what's going on with them, right? I don't want to get lost too deep into that rabbit hole. I feel like we could talk about a ton, but I want to talk about your research that you've done because you have a book that you've recently come out with, and I want to get to the book as well. But during your research, is there like certain triggers and traits or patterns that have been discovered that help people make decisions or compel people to make decisions in such a way?
Yeah, behavioral scientists have identified hundreds of these hardwired, automatic, instinctive responses that people have. And I cover about 25 of them in my book. The book is 288 pages, 17 chapters, and it lists my 25 or more kind of go-to behavioral science principles that work especially well, in my opinion at least, or in my experience, I should say at least, for marketers. So I drew upon a lot of the research that I've done, testing things, doing campaigns for clients, but also the research that other people have done. I've kind of read the books and the studies and kind of incorporated some of the research that other people have done, added that to my own. So the book itself is really a hands-on handbook. It's easy to get through. Don't let the word science in the title throw you, but it's really just very practical, very actionable, a lot of examples, case studies, bulleted takeaways, how-tos, do this, not this. These are the mistakes to avoid. These are the things to try. If this is the problem that you're having, here's a way to consider using behavioral science in order to overcome that problem or that challenge. So it's just jam-packed with lots of really useful tactical advice.
I think that's interesting. I don't think science should intimidate anyone on this. Like, I read a lot of business books, a lot of marketing books, and most of them could be better off just being like a short blog post because they just expand it out. But a lot of the times, these copywriting books and psychology books, at least targeted towards marketers, are not backed by research. Like, there's no real data that they're going off of, maybe some anecdotal data that they themselves have piled as their marketing. But I love the fact, like, you're actually digging in with real behavioral science with your book, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I have quoted some of the big names in behavioral science like Dan Ariely or Robert Cialdini, but then I've also used my own work. For example, we were talking about emotion and we were talking about problems and solutions, and we were talking about how we kind of identify what it is that we're offering our client or our customers, I guess. But one of my clients made business intelligence software. So kind of a sophisticated product, complicated product, a B2B product. And the way it operated was it would take information that was in disparate databases and it would kind of bubble it up so that you could have a complete 360 view. And that was a good thing because otherwise you were trying to make a decision without enough data or without all of the data. So we developed 3 different ways to market the product. And one was a basic, here's what we do. Here's a situation. Your data is locked in these different databases. We can unlock that for you, and that's going to be a good thing, right? So almost like, here's what we do. Another approach was more of a problem solution. Because your data is locked in the different databases, you're being forced to make decisions without an accurate full view. And as a result, you're probably going to make a mistake, and that's going to lead to loss. And then the third approach that we looked at was a very emotion-driven one. And we talked about what it felt like to have to make decisions knowing you don't have access to all of the data and what that does to you. I mean, it can keep you up at night. It can tie you up in knots. It can cause you to second guess yourself, because it's not just your job on the line, but the decisions that you're making affect the company, the employees of the company, the reputation of the company, maybe even the legal standing of the company. And it's a lot. And you know that you're making decisions without all of the information, and you think it's probably just a matter of time before something goes wrong. And so we led with that, and we had headlines like the delete button for that voice in your head, or the antacid for a diet of tough decisions. So we took all three of the approaches into testing, into real market conditions, to figure out which one was going to do the best. And it was the emotion-driven campaign that actually did the best. It got a 11% increase in brand favorability and a 13% increase in purchase intent. And it just goes to show you that there are a number of different ways to talk about products, particularly sophisticated B2B high-tech products. But at the end of the day, it was the emotion that was really the thing that was working. You need to demonstrate as a marketer that you understand the world that your customer is in, that you have empathy for that customer, and then that you have a product that could actually be beneficial for that customer. And that was some of my own research, and I thought it was pretty compelling. But there are things like that in the book, and then there are things from other marketers. There was one marketer who was testing the difference between, the marketer was in a position where they had to charge a $5 shipping fee, and they were testing the difference between framing it as a $5 fee or a small $5 fee. And Greg, you might say, well, everybody knows how much $5 is.
I'm deep enough in marketing to know that they don't.
Okay, well, so they framed it as a $5 fee or a small $5 fee when they added that word small, when they framed it as small, just reminding people, gee, $5 isn't that much. They got a 20% uptake in business. So it's really, really interesting, these behavioral science tactics, the influence and the impact that they can have. And the book is just filled with examples like this.
I want to get into a few of those techniques, but you brought up another story in my own head. So when I was in high school, I took a marketing class. This is before I found my true love into marketing. I was always like the weird kid who loved watching infomercials, and I never realized why until I took this marketing class. And I was fascinated by the psychology of it. But they had this example of 3 VHS tapes that were blank that you can buy to record movies on, back when VHS tapes were a thing. And they had the bargain price, the middle price, and then the premium price. And they were all the exact same tape, but the way that the positioning made up, people always went for the medium, but certain types of people would go for the bargain price and the premium price. Like the premium price people were usually more status seeking, and the bottom price was usually more the bargain freebie seeker. And I think that is such an interesting encapsulation, this whole idea of emotional positioning, because that's kind of what you're talking about with that last campaign, right? With the business intelligence tool. I knew that one was going to be the one that works, because that speaks to the heart. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're just so busy. Like, I got to get my e-commerce business up and running. I got to get my SaaS product roadmap figured out, that they forget the core thing that makes it all work. I believe it's that emotional position. I think that's just so strong. Do you have any opinions on how someone can find that if they don't know what that is for their business? Like how they can test and figure out what their customers are really feeling?
You talk to customers, you talk to your salespeople, you talk to your customer service reps, whoever's manning the phone. And I think you can mine those 3 areas for a lot of information. Talking to customers just about how did you come to the decision to buy, or why did you decide not to buy, and what was driving your decision? What were you currently doing before? Why was that inadequate? Then you talk to sales reps and you find out what is the common question that you keep hearing, or the common complaint that you hear, or what do people say they're looking for when they're talking to you. And then you talk to your customer service reps, and it's like, what are people complaining about, or what are they confused about, or are they surprised about? And you start to aggregate all of that information, and you'll start to see, I think, certain trends appearing, and you get a sense for, all right, this is the world that our prospects are living in, or our customers are living in, and these are the emotions that are swirling around in those worlds. Sometimes you have to do that kind of a deep dive. Other times you can take a pretty good guess, or have 2 or 3 hypotheses and say, okay, we're making this product, it's going to make people feel confident and feel a certain amount of status, or we're making this product and it's going to make people feel safe and comfortable. We're making this product and it's going to make people feel that they've got the inside story or information that other people don't have, or abilities or capabilities that other people don't have. And just based on the nature of the product or the service that you're marketing, you might be able to come up just in a brainstorming session with 2 or 3 different hypotheses, and then you develop the campaigns around them and get them out in the marketplace for some testing and start to see what really resonates.
I like both approaches. I think the customer surveys, jobs to be done, I think that's probably the more economical approach in a lot of ways. But there's something to be said about brute forcing the campaign, like testing them, see which one resonates. That I always think is like, I don't know, it's kind of like a game in of itself. In terms of the techniques, you mentioned a few earlier already, but in your view, what are the top techniques you'd recommend to help online business owners, trigger these hardwired decision responses in their customers? Are there like two or three techniques from your book that you could share with us that you think are just amazingly spot on, every entrepreneur should use?
Yeah, like I said, I've got over 25. So what you choose to use often depends on what your goal is, who you're marketing to, what the market conditions are. Are you brand new? Are you entrenched? Or is there a really strong competitor? Is price a barrier? Is awareness a barrier? I mean, there are lots of different things that will factor into the ones that you use. However, that said, I think that some of the ones that I often turn to that can be particularly effective are social proof and loss aversion and choice architecture. So social proof is the idea that when people aren't certain of what decision to make, they look to others and they follow their lead. And what's interesting is they don't assume that those other people are just as lost or confused or uncertain as they are. They assume the other people know something that they don't. And that's why social proof can work so well. So labeling something as the fastest growing or the most popular choice, or using customer testimonials. And here's something interesting with testimonials. A lot of times marketers think they want the absolute best 5-star or as close to 5-star as possible, like just these glowing reviews. And those are great. But honestly, what works better is a testimonial that starts kind of at that place of skepticism or that questioning spot, which is where most of your readers or your potential customers are going to be. They're going to be wondering, is it really as good as the marketer says it is? Is it going to be worth the money? Is it any better than this other competitor I'm considering? Is it any better than my current solution? And if you can find a testimonial that starts there, I used to think that all widgets were the same, but recently I switched companies. Oh my gosh, Acme widgets are so much better than my previous choice. That's when people are like, yes, that's what I thought. I used to wonder, is there really a difference? I used to think they were probably all the same, but here's someone who rolled the dice, spent the money to try something else. I'm going to go to school on their dime. I'm learning now that it's probably a smart move for me to move to Acme widgets because they do seem to be superior. So social proof can be very, very powerful. Loss aversion is also really interesting and a little counterintuitive, Greg, because in marketing, we're all about the benefits, the gains, the advantages, all the wonderful things that will happen if just do what I'm asking you to do, right? Just buy my product, just buy my service, just subscribe. And there's nothing wrong with benefits. We know that benefits work, but behavioral scientists have found that people are actually twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So what that means to us as marketers is not that we should run away from benefits, but that we should inject a little well-placed loss aversion because that's what people really pay attention to. People hate to lose out. So it could be something as simple of, instead of saying take advantage of, we say don't miss out on. But little bits of loss aversion can be incredibly powerful. And then the third thing I mentioned was something called choice architecture. And that's essentially this idea that the way choices are presented actually influences the decisions people make about them. And you touched on that a little bit, actually, when you talked about the bargain price, the mid price, and the deluxe price, and the way that they were described actually made a difference. If you were someone looking for status, even though it was the exact same product, but if you're looking for status, the description led you to that higher priced one. If you which way to go, you probably went with the middle one because there's something to be said for feeling comfortable in the middle. But the idea of choice architecture, this how choices are presented, can actually make a difference. We did a campaign for a company that was selling voluntary workplace benefits. So those are like insurance policies that you can buy at work, even though your employer is not going to pay for them. You're paying for them. The money will just come out of your paycheck, but it's a way for you to get extra life insurance or accident and disability insurance or cancer insurance or pet insurance, whatever. And what they were finding is traditionally they would say, hey, the insurance representative is going to be here at the company, sign up, schedule an appointment to meet with that representative. You can find out about the products and buy some if you're interested. And what they did is they used choice architecture and they flipped the script. And they instead sent out an email that said, we've scheduled your appointment with the representative. It's on this date at this time in this place. Just show up. If this time is inconvenient, click here to reschedule. But they made it so much easier to have the meeting it was actually harder to get out of the meeting. Initially, you'd have to take the effort to schedule the meeting. Here, they removed all of the effort. They just took care of it for you. They got a 418% increase in the number of people who actually showed up for a meeting. And then they ended up with a double-digit increase in the number of sales they made because more people were exposed to the information and made the decision for themselves that, oh, I could really use this. So simply just changing the choice from, would you like to schedule a meeting, to, we've scheduled it for you, you can decline it if you need to, made a huge difference. So choice architecture, loss aversion, social proof, those are three, I think, very powerful ones that could be very effective for marketers.
That choice architecture, I didn't think about it in terms of leading, which is the way I've learned about it in marketing and sales. I believe that's the term I initially learned it by, where people, if you want them to do something, just tell them to do it, and they'll more than likely do it, unless they're like very negative against what you want them to do. That's something I've seen in copywriting a lot. I like what you had to say about loss aversion. I think that's another thing a lot of marketers tend to get wrong. I know I certainly did when I first started out, where they're selling all the benefits. Your life is going to be crazy good after this. You just need to buy this product, to the point where it almost sounds like I'm begging you to please buy this for me. If you focus on the other side of the coin, the things you might lose if you don't purchase this, I think it has a lot more stickiness to it. Because I've read over and over again that people fear loss so much more than they fear gain. I imagine if you took all these three techniques of your 25 or so, you could bile them together. You just have a superstorm of just amazingness happening in your marketing funnel. Do you see some people like combine all 25 of your techniques in like a single campaign? Do you have any stories like that?
That would be a pretty tall order, although I
Would
guess
it?
then you'd have to say, well, how are you defining a campaign? Are you looking at like a year's worth of content and saying this is our annual content campaign? Or are you looking at maybe a series of 25 emails over the course of a couple of months or something? I suppose in a case like that, it might be possible to get all 25 in. I myself find that sometimes I'll do something for a client and it just comes down hard on one particular human behavior trigger, one particular piece of behavioral science, but very often I'll combine 2 or 3 or 4 in a single email or a single direct mail package or a single ad. Sometimes if you're really limited in terms of space, you have to kind of pull back a little bit and not get as many of them in. But there are many times when I'll have quite a few of them in there. I've yet to use all 25, though. I will say that would be an interesting challenge, I think.
We got to work on a campaign together, Nancy. We'll make it happen. I'm intrigued what the results might be. It might just be a confusing mess, like loss aversion and gain at the same time, scarcity and like plenty, all they're just conflicting with each other. That might be a fun challenge. Well, that's cool. Do you find that this stuff works differently across different demographics? Like, does this loss aversion work the same way on an 18-year-old as it does on a 50-year-old? Cultural backgrounds, do you find any difference between that?
Yeah, so there's actually two answers to that. So the first answer is humans are all pretty much hardwired the same way. The human brain hasn't changed all that much throughout the course of evolution. So a lot of these really are hardwired innate responses that we have that really go back to our ancient ancestors. We just learned certain things, and at the time that our ancient ancestors learned them, they really served to keep us alive. And those were the genes that got passed down from generation to generation. And now, most of the time, things aren't as life-threatening for us, but we use these decision-making shortcuts, these decision defaults, just to help us conserve mental energy, to help us get through the day. So the first part of the answer is they're fairly universal. The second part of the answer is, that said, there are instances where things play out a little bit differently based on culture or based on age or based on gender. And that's where you start to peel back the layers of the onion and you can get a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more exact. For example, loss aversion, it doesn't seem to work as well for an older population. It seems like as humans get older, at some point we just get to the spot where we're just not interested in bad news and we shut it off. We shut it out, we shut it off. And so we're almost immune to it. We're almost immune to these loss aversion marketing ploys. It doesn't work as well. Whereas for young people, or younger people, I should say, it could be very, very powerful. Then there's just the notion of culture. And in the West, we can be a lot more competitive and more individual focused. Something like exclusivity might be more important to us. Like, you can stand out among your peers, you can have access that your colleagues don't have. Whereas in the East, it's really more about the group, that you're working with. And it's like, it's what's good for all of us is the thing that's good for each one of us. And so things like being the one may not be as effective. And then even gender sometimes comes into it. And again, this is just research that I have read. I don't want to come off as sexist. I'm just saying this is what I've read. But women can be a little bit more community oriented and men can be a little bit more competitive. So with men, sometimes you want to say, how do you measure up against other guys in the field or other guys on the basketball court or whatever? Whereas women, it might be together we can solve this, or together we can get this done. As a matter of fact, I did actually do a piece for, it was an insurance company that was aimed at selling disability insurance to dentists. And we had a really good control, a powerful control, but we didn't segment based on gender. And when we took the control, which was the piece that was doing the best for us, when we took that and we did a version of it specifically for women where we changed the language a little bit to reflect this, together we can do this, and you probably have a lot on your plate because there's research that indicates that women have this sense that they have to do all this multitasking. When we added some of that language and then only mailed it to women, we actually saw an increase in response versus sending the kind of unisex piece to women. So there do seem to be some differences based on culture or gender or age. They're more nuanced, they're more subtle, but as you start to dig into them, as you start to dig into your personas, as you start to dig into your audience segmentation, you can find some wins there. But again, backing up, people are people, and a lot of these decision-making shortcuts are hardwired into us and will manifest to a greater or lesser extent, regardless.
Yeah, it's like a variance of flavors on the same good old trusty millions of years skeleton of the human race. I find that fascinating. When people apply these behavioral strategies into their digital marketing, what are the common mistakes you see? And is one of those mistakes putting all 25 of them into a single ad campaign? Like I mentioned earlier.
No, I mean, we might need to team up and give that a try. I think one of the mistakes might be you try something once and you don't get this response that you were hoping for. You didn't triple your response rate or something, and you say, okay, obviously this doesn't work. And that's a mistake because you need to test your way into this. We're working with hypotheses. There's no magic wand. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing that's going to make everyone always respond. If that was the case, marketers wouldn't need to market. We just have everything on autopilot. So one mistake is, you dip your toe in, and if you don't get these enormous results right away, you say, no, it's not working. Another mistake is you hear something or you read something and you think, oh, I can do this. And without a lot of previous exposure or any prior experience, you try something, but it's possible that you actually execute it wrong. But again, if you don't get the right response, you think, okay, it doesn't work. For example, we talked about social proof. And this idea that, when people aren't certain of what to do, they look to others, particularly others like themselves, and they follow their lead. Social proof can be really powerful, but you can also misapply it and it can backfire. So if you're selling insurance and you say too many people wait until after they're age 50 before they buy life insurance, you should really buy it now. The message you're sending to people is, oh, a lot of people wait until they're 50 or older. I'm in good company. I'm just going to wait. When you're like, no, 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 you're sending them the absolute wrong message. So there are some mistakes in terms of misapplying the principles. There are some mistakes in terms of being too anxious for quick results. But other than that, put those mistakes aside, I still encourage people to explore adding behavioral science to their marketing because there are some definite wins that you can achieve.
I like that. Every now and then we'll get a business owner that wants to sell their business with us. And in their mind, like, this is the next $15 million brand, something like that, which is relatively big size on our marketplace. And we would look at the P&L like, well, no, this is the next $3 million brand, because that's what you're making right now is $3 million for the valuation. But they will go to buyers, like if they don't use a broker like us, they'll say stuff like that to a buyer. And in the buyer's mind, that positioning, that framing of that is like, okay, great. So your business is worth 15 million. I'm going to give you 500K up front. And then once we hit that valuation, you're going to get a way crazy big payday. So their own confidence almost trips them up. Now they already get the $3 million, they're getting 500K, maybe something else if they actually hit the 15 million. All that framing and position, I think that's quite funny. Kind of tripping over yourself with it. With your experience, I'm sure in your own way you've experienced this, but in my industry, there is a lot of marketing gurus out there doing like the modern day infomercial with all sorts of crazy, weird marketing tricks that they talk about. Most of them don't work, as you might have guessed. Is there any cringy marketing techniques that you see that's happening out there in the marketplace, just in general, that you think would be good to avoid?
There are a couple that I've been on the receiving end of that kind of drive me crazy. One of them is I hate to get those LinkedIn invitations and sooner accept and you get hit with a pitch slapped, I guess you'd say, right? You literally just accepted and suddenly, boom, there's this like 3, 4, 5 paragraph thing coming at you saying, this is why we should work together. And it's like, my gosh, like slow down a minute. So that drives me crazy. And then I think the other one is kind of similar, but you get these cold emails and they say, oh, we've reviewed your insert property or your social media, your website, whatever. And we have 3 things that could actually enhance it. And, I've gotten them upon occasion where I've said, no, you didn't, because I don't have a social media profile with that name, So like, come on.
I love stuff like that. On my LinkedIn, I love it when I get a cold pitch where it's like, hey, Greg, this is not a robotic message at all. This is completely authentic. I would love to help Empire Flippers buy, sell, and invest in online businesses, grow their audience. And they have that, like, our taglines in the title of our LinkedIn page. So it's just like, it makes it go ultra long. Like, yeah, clearly this is automated. But Nancy, I have bad news to tell you. I just sent you a connection request on LinkedIn. As soon as you do connect, I will have sent you a manual $10 gift card to collaborate with me at your local Chili's, which is my personal pet peeve because I get that message all the time when I'm in Vietnam. Like, oh, you don't do your research. I'm not even in the country.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what it comes down to. They like to suggest that they've done their research. They like to have this veneer of personalization, but it's so wrong. When it's wrong, it's so wrong.
Yeah, for sure. So, what real world examples have you seen the positive impact of what we're talking about here that you apply these behavioral science to your marketing? And what's the transformation of the business afterwards? You mentioned a few campaigns, but is there another one that really stands out to you?
Yeah. So there was one, we were working with a company that sold software as a service, and it was a subscription marketing service. And we employed something called information gap theory. And information gap theory is a term that was coined by a neuroeconomist named George Lowenstein. And what he found was if there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, you'll take action to close the gap. So if there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, you'll take action to close that gap. And a good way to kind of tee up information gap theory is to use the 5 W's and the 1-8, who, what, where, when, why, how. But you pose a question, and it's a question that people are interested in, but they don't have the answer to. And very often people will say, well, I need to find the answer. So what we did is we were working with this SaaS company. They were doing subscription marketing services. So it was things like website development, SEO, social presence. And what we did is we sent the target a personal marketing assessment. So we said, here is the vertical that you're in your area. Here are the number of Google searches for that particular vertical in your particular geographic location. And here is your website score. We've taken a look at your website and we've given you a score and kind of like, here's where you are. Here's kind of what you might be missing out on. And we actually got a 40% increase in leads for this particular company because it was so personalized and because it was really playing off of that idea of information gap theory. It's like, oh, well, where do I stand relative to other companies and how much traffic is there in my area that I might be missing because I don't have a strong online presence or I haven't optimized my online presence. I think it was a really powerful campaign. It got the 40% bump in leads. And as opposed to what you and I were earlier discussing, where it's clearly just this automated thing, this was actually done. Like went in, they would review a website, they would run the numbers, and then they would actually update them weekly so that the target had a URL that they could go to and they could check to see what was changing week over week. So it was a pretty interesting application of information gap theory with a really good result.
Wow, that's awesome. You just said there made me think of another question here. In terms of these different techniques, like the ones you detail in your book, is there a rhyme or reason why you might choose one over the other? Like, do you choose multiple of them and just split test it?
We often choose multiple ones to test, but it's not just like throwing darts against the wall and saying, okay, we're going to do this one, and this one. What we do is we look at, here's what the marketing challenge is. Here's what the mindset of the prospective customer likely is. We look at what we think is the number one barrier to purchase, and then we look for the number one way to overcome it. So, for example, we had a client that was trying to sell employees on the idea of saving more for retirement. So either open an IRA or contribute more to your IRA, but the idea was to save more for retirement. So we tried a few different approaches. We were like, all right, let's try social proof. One reason people may not be opening or contributing to IRAs is because they don't know if they should. It's like, I don't know. No one really talks about IRAs. I'm still kind of young. Do I even need one? So we tried one approach that said, why so many people stash their cash in work retirement accounts? And then we said, well, all right, another one might be loss aversion. Maybe we can test loss aversion because people might be, well, we know that they're more motivated by the idea of loss versus gain.
I was just thinking that like a campaign, how to be broke at 60, targeting like young 20s.
Yes, we did something like, are you making this mistake with your retirement money? Which is pretty good. It's like, all right, well, that's should motivate people. And then we thought another thing might be just, we know that people respond to information that they think isn't widely available. It's this idea of scarcity. Not only do we value scarce products more because they're harder to get, but we find information that's not widely more believable. So we tried an approach that was, a lot of people don't know this one fact about saving for retirement and how to increase your earnings. So we had the social proof angle, we had the scarcity angle, and we had the loss aversion angle, and we put all three into the marketplace. And what we found, Greg, was that all three worked, but loss aversion worked the best. So it was interesting. What we do when we're trying to determine what to test is, again, we look at what the potential barriers might be, think of the levers that might overcome them or the arguments that might overcome them, and then we look to see what behavioral science tactics would be best suited.
Yeah, I like that. Especially love the fact that you seem very into testing. I feel like a lot of marketers just throw it up, spray and pray kind of mentality and never look at the numbers. So this book you released, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, one, if that's an SEO title if I've ever heard one, I like it. It says write what's on the tin, which I think is cool. What inspired you to write the book?
I was scheduled to speak at South by Southwest, and I've spoken there a few times, but the particular year that I was scheduled to speak, it was the pandemic and they canceled it. But Kogan Page, which is a UK-based publisher, saw that I was going to be speaking, saw the topic, which had to do with behavioral science, and reached out to me and said, this looks very interesting. Would you consider submitting a book proposal to us? And I was like, ooh, yeah, and it's funny because
That's awesome.
I do a lot of speaking at conferences, and every once in a while someone would come up to me and say, I'm going to buy your book. And I'd be like, well, that'd be very interesting because I don't have one.
Let me know where you found it. I'd be curious.
But yeah, let me know where you find it. Exactly. The first time I heard it, I was like flattered. The second time I thought that's kind of a coincidence. But I heard it a few times, and then Kogan Page approached me. So I submitted the proposal and they accepted it. And so that's what kind of sent me on my way. And I was going to be speaking at South by about behavioral science and marketing. So obviously that's what the book was going to be about. And then it's so funny that you said it's a great SEO title. It benefits from what's on the tin. That is precisely what the publisher based in Britain said. And, I just got tickled by benefits by saying what's on the tin. So that's what led me to write the book. I really felt that when I speak at conferences, people come up to me sometimes 2-3 years later and say, I saw you 2-3 years ago. I wrote down a bunch of what you said and it really worked. I've tried it and it worked. And I thought this was a way to get something that I know works, something I really believe in, out to people. I can only work with so many clients. I can only speak at so many conferences. This could put the information into so many more hands. And that just really excited me. I love the prospect of that. And that was really, in addition to being asked to write the book, that was what motivated me to say yes.
That's awesome. Oh, that's such a cool story. And speaking of the SEO thing, I have a friend, he runs an SEO agency for law firms, and he wrote a book called Law Firm SEO, like tagline SEO for lawyers, right? And someone typed in like law firm SEO into Google, and Google had put his book on Amazon, like in the informational, like knowledge graph, a box that they sometimes do on the right side. And like, it's just his book. The first 3 slots and half of the first page on the right side was just his book. And someone posted like, hey, did you do this on purpose? Like, it's been my grand plan for like 20 years to do this.
Sweet.
A true SEO in the title. Is there something unique you think in your book that you're offering that can't easily be found in other marketing books?
It's a couple of things. It's written from the perspective of a marketer, a practitioner. A lot of behavioral science books are written by academics or by researchers, and those are great. And I quote some of them in my book, but this is written from the perspective of someone who's in the trenches, who's doing the work. So I've done the work of doing the research and figuring out specifically how it applies to marketing, because marketers are busy. They don't necessarily have time to do the research. They don't have time to even read and think about some of this stuff. And I've done that because I really enjoy it. So part of it is it's written from the perspective of a marketing practitioner. And then the other thing is a lot of the research is research that I have done myself. So I've been doing these test and curating the case studies and curating the results, as well as reading other people's tests and staying on top of their results. And the result is a very practical, tactical, actionable book. You can dip in and out of it. You can read it chapter 1 through 17 in chronological order, or you could pop in and out based on what it is you're trying to do. As you look at the chapters, you might say, that's an issue that I'm having. So let me just go to that chapter and read up on some things that I can use to overcome that challenge. So it's just really meant to be hands-on and actionable and practical, short on science, big on marketing, but still well-researched enough. You feel it's evidence-based. It's not just Nancy's opinion. There's really some solid fact behind it.
I love that. Before we get into the rapid fire section here, you've been in marketing for a while. You've seen a lot of changes in the space. In your view, how has marketing changed over those last few years? And as consumers shifted their attention to online shopping, have you seen new challenges rising? Or do you see a new trend that's like on the horizon people should be paying attention to?
One of the biggest things that came out of this, huge explosion in online now, kind of fueled by the pandemic, is people's expectations have increased. And regardless of who it was with, their best online experience now becomes the baseline. And that's what they expect from everybody else. And so it's really forced some marketers to try to rapidly up their game, because it's not just enough to be good at what you do. It's not just enough to be maybe better than your number one competitor. These days, you really have to be kind of embody all of the best practices, market leading. It's not just in your particular vertical, but just across the board. If someone has fabulous customer service, if someone has great UX, if somebody has very little friction, then that's what you have to have, because your customers are experiencing that someplace else. They expect it from you too.
I can totally relate to that pressure. Like my background is SEO and content marketing, and I've been racking my brain on zero-click content and a more social-first strategy as we're trying to get more into the SaaS world. We do a lot of e-commerce and media businesses, but very little SaaS at the moment. We're trying to change that around. But yeah, like it's just like not my background. So like diving into it, like, I don't know the clear path. So I've been in the research phases myself to just figure out what are the best practices there and how to implement it, because it's never quite clear. But yeah, I agree. Times are changing there. Well, Nancy, we reached the final part of the interview and the hardest part, which is the rapid fire section. So I'll ask you 3 questions. You give me your first thoughts that come to your mind. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. No pressure. So, what are the best hidden marketing opportunities in your view that a business owner can take advantage of today?
Well, I would have to say it would be adding behavioral science to their marketing campaigns. The potential for quick wins and big wins is enormous, and it's low cost, low effort to do. So that would be my answer. Tap into behavioral science.
I made that one too easy. I should have used some loss aversion to set up more stressful execution on that question. What tools or resources can entrepreneurs use to increase their conversions?
I think that they should pick up a copy of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Response. It's all in there, everything you need to know.
That was brilliantly said. That was a well strung together sentence. Awesome. So the hardest question on this entire list, what has been your funniest moment since you started working in the marketing industry?
I guess there have been a few, but this one is suitable for public consumption. I was doing some work for Berklee Online, which is the world's largest online music school. And I was consulting with them and teaching them how to infuse their marketing with behavioral science, and teach them about the different principles and how to make small adjustments to the copy to get big returns, because you're adding some behavioral science and marketing best practices to it. And I subsequently found out that after the work was done, the consulting period was done, they were off and running. And what they would do is when they would be working and somebody would be reviewing the copy, they would send it back upon occasion and say, you need to Nancify this, which I thought was kind of funny, because my name is Nancy, right? Yeah, so you need to Nancify this. So they wouldn't say like, oh, you need to add more behavioral science or you need to make these changes. They would just start to send things back and say, needs to be Nancified, needs to be Nancified. And the CEO of Berklee Online told me that, and we had a good laugh over it. I felt good about it too.
That's great. You become a verb unto yourself in the marketing world. That's high praise. Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this podcast. I think there's a lot here. And for everyone out there in the audience listening to this, like this sounds like a lot of work. You don't have enough time to do it. Any of that, I implore you, pick up Nancy's book, because this type of stuff actually doesn't take that much an additional time to what you're doing once you understand how to use it. So I think this is just like foundational, really good stuff here. But Nancy, for anyone listening to this and wanting to connect with you further, maybe get a signed copy of the book, where is a good place for them to connect with you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at nharhut, Nharhut. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. The agency website has a lot of great information. It's HBTMKTG, which is the abbreviation of marketing, HBT, Human Behavior Triggers, HBTMKTG.com. So any of those places, I'd love to hear from your listeners. So encourage you to connect. That would be great. And the book, of course, is at Kogan Page or Amazon or Target or Barnes & Noble, really any place fine books are sold, including many independent bookstores.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Nancy. I loved the interview.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking to you, and I can't wait for the two of us to team up and do that piece that has all 25 human behavior triggers in it.
We're going to go down in history. All right. Talk to you soon.
It. All right.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace. Or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.